Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's begin. It was a quiet Thursday morning at the Millbrook Public Library, the kind of morning where everything felt safe, predictable, comforting. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting warm patches across the worn wooden floors. The smell of old books and fresh coffee from the small cafe mingled in the air. Elderly patrons sat at reading tables with newspapers spread before them. A grandmother read quietly to her grandson in the children's section. Volunteers shelved returned books with practiced efficiency. This was a sanctuary, a place where people came to find peace, to escape the noise of the world, to feel safe. Officer Thomas Walsh had been making his rounds through this library for 15 years. He knew the regulars by name: Mrs. Patterson, who came every Tuesday and Thursday, Mr. A. Chen, who spent his afternoons in the history section, the volunteers who'd been here longer than he had. Nothing ever happened here. That's what made it perfect. Thomas walked through the main hall, nodding to familiar faces. He passed the circulation desk, waved to Linda the librarian, and continued toward the back stacks where the older collections were kept. That's when he saw them. Two little girls sitting on the floor between the tall shelves, tucked into a corner where the light didn't quite reach. Thomas slowed his steps. The older girl had bright red hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She sat with her back perfectly straight against the bookshelf, her posture rigid, too rigid for a child. Her eyes were alert, watchful, scanning the area like someone who'd learned to always be aware. Beside her, a smaller girl, also red-haired, lay on a piece of flattened cardboard. And even from several feet away, Thomas could see something was very wrong. The little one's face was swollen, puffy. Her small belly looked distended beneath her oversized shirt. Her breathing was shallow, labored. Her eyes were barely open, glassy and unfocused. Something in Thomas broke. Not a dramatic break, not a loud one, but a quiet, fundamental shift. The moment when you see something you can't unsee. When you understand that what you're witnessing is terribly, horribly wrong. He approached slowly, carefully, not wanting to startle them. "Hey there," Thomas said gently, crouching down a few feet away. "Are you girls okay?" The older girl looked up. Her eyes met his, clear, guarded, far too old for her face. "We're fine," she said quietly. Thomas's gaze moved to the younger child. She wasn't fine. She was desperately, critically unwell. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked the older girl. "Emily." "And this is your sister?" Emily nodded, her hand resting protectively on the smaller girl's shoulder. "Lily." Thomas studied the scene more carefully. The cardboard beneath them was worn, compressed from days of use. There were empty water bottles lined up neatly against the shelf. A small backpack with what looked like crackers inside. These children hadn't just stopped here to rest. They'd been living here. "Emily, how long have you two been here?" Emily hesitated, choosing her words with deliberate care. "A few days, I think." "Where are your parents?" Emily's expression didn't change. She didn't look away. She didn't cry or panic. Instead, she took a slow, measured breath, like someone who had rehearsed this moment many times in her mind. And then she spoke, her voice calm, almost eerily composed. "My dad tried to help, and failed." The words landed like stones in still water. Thomas felt ice run through his chest. He saw what no one else had wanted to see. A critically ill child, a father who tried to help and failed. Two children living in a public library, surrounded by people, and no one had stopped. Thomas reached for his radio immediately. "Dispatch, this is Officer Walsh. I need paramedics at Millbrook Public Library, back stacks, East Wing. Two minors, younger one approximately 3 years old, appears critically ill. Medical emergency. Immediate response required." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "Are we in trouble?" "No, honey, no, you're not in trouble." Thomas kept his voice steady even as his heart pounded. "But your sister needs help. Real help. From doctors. And I'm going to make sure she gets it right away." Within minutes, the quiet library transformed. Sirens echoed outside. Paramedics rushed through the front doors with equipment. Patrons looked up from their books, startled. Volunteers stopped mid-task. Everyone turned to watch as the paramedics knelt beside Lily, checking her vital signs with urgent efficiency. And Thomas stood there, looking at the people gathered, the regulars he'd known for years, the volunteers, the staff. All of them had walked past this spot, some of them multiple times, and no one had stopped to ask if these children were okay. He saw what no one else had wanted to see, and now he had to make sure it never happened again. Chapter 2. The library that saw everything. The paramedics worked quickly, their movements practiced and efficient. One knelt beside Lily, gently placing an oxygen mask over her small, swollen face. The other checked her pulse, her temperature, her responsiveness. Fever of 104, one paramedic said quietly to his partner. Severe edema. Breathing is labored. We need to move now. Emily watched every movement with intense focus, her hand still resting on Lily's shoulder. When they began to lift Lily onto a stretcher, Emily stood immediately. I'm going with her. Of course you are, sweetheart, the paramedic said gently. Stay close. As they carried Lily through the library toward the exit, people began to gather. Whispers spread through the quiet space like ripples across water. An elderly woman at a nearby table stood up, her hand covering her mouth. Those girls? I've seen them here before. A man near the history section nodded slowly. I saw them yesterday, and the day before that. One by one, patrons began to murmur recognition. Detective Laura Brennan arrived just as the ambulance pulled away, sirens fading into the distance. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and direct, with 15 years of experience that had taught her to see what others missed. Officer Walsh met her at the entrance. What do we have, Thomas? 2 girls. Emily, age 10, and Lily, age 3. Found them in the back stacks. The younger one is critically ill. Severe swelling, high fever, barely responsive. They just transported her to Metro General. Where are the parents? Thomas pulled out his notepad. That's the question. The older girl said something when I asked. She said my dad tried to help and failed. Laura's expression sharpened. Tried to help how? I don't know yet. But that little girl has been sick for a while, Laura. This didn't happen overnight. Laura walked to the back stacks where the girls had been found. She crouched down, examining the scene with careful attention. The cardboard was worn smooth, compressed from days, maybe weeks, of use. There were water bottles, some empty, some half full, a small backpack with crackers, a juice box, a worn, stuffed animal, books stacked nearby, as if someone had been reading to pass the time. These children had been living here, right here, in one of the most frequented public spaces in the city. Laura stood and looked around at the library, at the reading tables visible from this spot, at the walkways people used constantly, at the circulation desk just 50 feet away. How many people come through this library every day? She asked Thomas. Hundreds. It's one of the busiest in the district, especially in the mornings. Retirees, parents with young children, students. And nobody noticed 2 children living in the back stacks? Thomas was quiet for a moment. I think people noticed. They just didn't stop. Laura turned to Linda, the head librarian, who stood nearby wringing her hands. Ms. Chen, how often do you walk through this section? Linda's voice trembled. Multiple times a day. I shelve books here. I check for items that need repair. Did you see Emily and Lily? Linda's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I saw them, several times over the past week. Did you speak to them? I smiled at them once. The older girl was reading to the younger one. It seemed sweet. I thought maybe their mother was browsing in another section. Linda covered her face with her hands. I should have asked. I should have checked. But there are always families here. You assumed someone was watching them. Laura finished gently. Linda nodded, unable to speak. Laura began interviewing other staff and patrons. Each conversation followed the same devastating pattern. A retired teacher named Margaret. I come here every morning to read the newspaper. I saw those girls at least 4 or 5 times this week. The older one always sat so still. I thought it was nice. A responsible big sister watching her little sister while Mom used the computer or looked for books. Did you ever see an adult with them? Margaret's face went pale. No, now that you mention it, no, they were always alone. A volunteer named Robert. I shelve books in that section twice a week. I saw them Tuesday and yesterday. I even thought about asking if they needed help finding something, but they looked occupied. I didn't want to intrude. So you walked away? Robert looked down at his hands. Yes, I walked away. One by one, the confessions came. I saw them. I thought about asking. I assumed someone else was responsible. I didn't want to get involved. Laura listened to each statement, taking careful notes. But what struck her most wasn't what people said. It was what they didn't say. No one said, "I stopped to make sure they were okay." No one said, "I asked if they needed help." No one said, "I called someone." By late morning, Laura had interviewed 23 people who'd been in the library over the past week. 18 of them recognized Emily and Lily from photos. Not one had stopped to help. "Detective," Thomas said quietly, approaching her, "how does this happen? How do two children live in a public library for days and nobody does anything?" Laura looked around at the patrons still gathered, at the staff members crying quietly, at the volunteers standing in small groups looking devastated. "Because everyone assumed someone else already had," she said. "Everyone thought surely someone more qualified, more responsible, more official has already handled this." And so everyone kept walking. Thomas looked at the cardboard still on the floor, at the small backpack, at the books. "They were right here," he said, "in plain sight, and we all just walked past." Laura nodded. "Yes, and now we need to find out why this family fell apart, and why no one caught them before they hit the ground." Chapter 3. The recognition comes too late. By afternoon, the library had become the center of a growing storm. News crews set up cameras outside. Reporters interviewed patrons as they left. The story spread quickly across local news and social media. Two sisters found living in public library. Youngest in critical condition community asks, "How did no one notice?" Inside, Detective Laura Brennan continued her interviews. What emerged was a pattern that made her chest tighten with each conversation. An elderly woman named Dorothy approached Laura hesitantly. She leaned on a cane, her hands shaking. "Detective, I need to tell you something." Laura turned. "Yes, ma'am? I come to this library every single day. I have for the past 10 years since my husband passed. It's my routine." Dorothy's voice cracked. "I saw those girls. Not once, not twice. I saw them at least 6 times over the past 2 weeks. Did you speak to them?" Dorothy shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, the older one was always reading quietly. The little one was always resting. I thought they were just waiting for their mother. You know how children get tired in libraries. I assumed their mother was in another section. Did you ever see an adult with them?" "No." The word came out as a whisper. "I never did, and I never asked. I just kept walking to my usual table." Laura placed a gentle hand on Dorothy's arm. "Ma'am, you're not alone in this. Many people had the same thought." "But why?" Dorothy looked at her desperately. "Why didn't any of us stop? Why didn't we ask?" It was the question everyone was asking. A library volunteer named James came forward next. He was in his 60s, recently retired, kind-faced and soft-spoken. "I was shelving books in that section yesterday morning," he said quietly. "I saw the girls. The older one was sitting so still and the little one was lying down. I remember thinking the little one looked pale, unwell." "What did you do?" James looked down. "I thought about saying something. I really did. But then I thought, maybe I'm overreacting, maybe she's just tired. Surely if something was really wrong, someone would have already done something. So I finished shelving my cart and moved to the next section." "And you didn't mention it to anyone?" "No." He looked up at Laura with devastated eyes. "I thought about it all day, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that I didn't want to interfere, that it wasn't my place to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Laura wrote this down, her hand steady even as her heart ached. A young mother named Sarah approached, holding her toddler's hand. "I saw them 3 days ago," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I was here with my son. We were in the children's section and I saw the older girl walk past carrying water bottles. She looked so responsible, so careful. I remember thinking what a good big sister she was." "Did you see where she went?" "Back to that corner in the stacks. I could see them from where I was sitting. The little one was lying down. Even then I thought something seemed off. But my son was pulling books off the shelf, and I was distracted and I told myself someone else was watching them." Sarah's voice broke. "I thought someone else was watching them." By late afternoon, Laura had collected statements from over 30 people. The pattern was unmistakable and heartbreaking. Everyone had seen. Many had noticed something was wrong. Not one had stopped to help. Linda, the head librarian, gathered her staff in the break room. Her face was pale, her voice shaking. "I need to know. Did anyone else see those children before today? 4 staff members raised their hands slowly. Why didn't anyone say anything? Linda asked, not accusatory but genuinely confused. Why didn't we ask if they were okay? A young clerk named Maria spoke up. I saw them Tuesday. I thought about asking, but they weren't doing anything wrong. They were just sitting quietly. I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable. I thought maybe their parent was using the computers and told them to wait there. Another staff member. I thought someone else had already checked. We have so many regular families. I assumed security had already spoken to them. But we don't have security, Linda said quietly. It's just us. The silence that followed was crushing. Outside, Officer Thomas Walsh stood on the library steps watching the news crews. A reporter approached him. Officer Walsh, can you tell us how long those children were in the library? Thomas chose his words carefully. Based on physical evidence and witness statements, it appears they were there for at least several days, possibly longer. And no one reported them? Multiple people saw them, but no one stopped to ask if they needed help. Why not? Thomas looked back at the library, this safe, quiet, familiar place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. That, he said quietly, is what we're all trying to understand. Because the real question wasn't just who failed these children. It was how an entire community could see 2 children in distress day after day and collectively decide it wasn't their problem to solve. Chapter 4. What came before 1 year earlier. The Bennett apartment was small but filled with warmth. 2 bedrooms in a modest building on the west side of town. Photos covered the refrigerator. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary moments made precious by love. It was a Sunday morning. The smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. Rebecca Bennett stood at the stove, her red hair, the same vibrant shade as her daughter's, tied back in a loose bun. She moved with practiced efficiency, flipping pancakes while simultaneously checking Emily's backpack for Monday and making sure Lily's sippy cup was within reach. Emily sat at the small table, coloring in a workbook. Lily was in her high chair, banging a spoon rhythmically and giggling. Almost ready, Rebecca said, sliding pancakes onto plates. Emily, can you get the syrup? Emily jumped up. Can I have chocolate chips? Just a few, Rebecca smiled. David walked in from the bedroom pulling on his jacket. He looked different then, lighter somehow, present. He kissed Rebecca on the cheek. Smells amazing. Sit. Eat. You have 20 minutes before your shift. David sat beside Emily and gently tapped Lily's hand. How's my little drummer? Lily squealed with delight, banging louder. For that moment, everything was perfectly, beautifully ordinary. Rebecca was the invisible framework of their family. She knew exactly when Lily would wake up at night. She knew which pharmacy had their prescriptions. She knew Emily's teacher's name, the best route to avoid traffic, how to stretch $30 into a week's worth of meals, when bills were due, where important documents were kept. She held all the knowledge that kept their family functioning smoothly, and when she got sick, that knowledge began to disappear with her. It started with persistent exhaustion. I'm just tired, Rebecca insisted when David suggested she see a doctor. I'll rest this weekend. But the exhaustion didn't fade. Then came the persistent cough, then unexplained weight loss. When Rebecca collapsed at work 3 months later, David's world began to fracture. The hospital kept her for tests, then more tests, then a diagnosis that changed everything. David tried to hold things together. He worked. He visited Rebecca every evening. He took care of Emily and Lily as best he could, but he didn't know where Rebecca kept the spare keys. He didn't know which bills were on auto-pay. He didn't know that Lily's medication needed to be taken with food, or that Emily had a field trip permission slip due, or that the landlord needed to be called about the leaking faucet. All the invisible work Rebecca had done, the hundreds of small decisions and actions that kept their family running, suddenly became visible through their absence. The medical bills started arriving. Even with insurance, the costs were crushing. David began missing work to stay at the hospital. His employer was understanding at first, then less so. David, we need reliability. If you can't commit to your schedule, I'll be here, I promise. But promises were becoming impossible to keep. When Rebecca died 4 months later, David didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't speak. He just sat, staring at nothing, while Emily held his hand and Lily asked over and over, "Where's Mama?" After the funeral, David sat alone in the dark apartment, Rebecca's coffee mug still on the counter, her reading glasses on the nightstand, her sweater on the back of the chair. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, except she wasn't coming back. David stared at the pile of unopened bills on the kitchen table, at the eviction notice he'd been too overwhelmed to address, at the phone that kept ringing with calls from people asking for things he couldn't give. He felt himself slipping, not all at once, but slowly, like sand through fingers. Emily learned quickly. She started making sandwiches for Lily. She turned on cartoons to keep her quiet. She stopped asking Daddy for things because he didn't seem to hear anymore. She was 9 years old, but she was learning to be something much older. 3 months after Rebecca died, the eviction became final. David sat on the floor of the empty apartment, surrounded by boxes he couldn't remember packing, holding an eviction notice he couldn't process. "We'll figure it out," he whispered to Emily, his voice hollow. "We'll find somewhere." But there was nowhere. No family nearby. Rebecca's parents were gone and David's family lived across the country. No savings. Everything had gone to medical bills. No job. He'd been let go weeks ago for too many absences. Rebecca had known how to ask for help. She'd known which agencies to call, which neighbors to lean on, which forms to fill out. But Rebecca was gone, and David was drowning in a world he no longer understood how to navigate. The scene fades. David sitting alone in the dark, Rebecca's belongings still around him, the invisible map of their family lost forever, and Emily watching from the doorway, beginning to understand that from now on, she would have to be the one who remembered things, who made sure Lily was fed, who kept them safe, because no one else could anymore. Chapter 5. The Silent Collapse. 5 months after Rebecca's death, David sat in his car in a parking lot, staring at the final eviction notice. His hands trembled as he held the paper, reading the same words over and over without comprehending them. Final notice. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. In the back seat, Emily had created a small nest with blankets for herself and Lily. Lily was asleep, her thumb in her mouth. Emily was awake, watching her father with eyes that had learned to read silences. "Daddy, are we going somewhere?" David didn't answer immediately. His mind felt like thick fog, present but directionless. "Tomorrow, sweetheart. But we need food." David looked at the crumpled bills in the cup holder. $4, that was all. "Tomorrow," he repeated quietly. But tomorrow kept slipping away. When the sheriff came to enforce the eviction, David didn't resist. He simply gathered what little they had: 2 bags of clothes, Lily's stuffed rabbit, a few photos of Rebecca. They tried a shelter first, but the rules were strict. No staying during the day, 2-week maximum, check in by 6 p.m., or lose your space. David tried to follow the rules, but some days time simply disappeared. He'd sit on a bench somewhere, and hours would pass without him noticing. Emily became the one who watched the clock, who reminded him when they needed to leave, who kept Lily quiet and occupied. She was 10 years old, but she'd stopped being a child. One evening, they arrived at the shelter 15 minutes late. The coordinator shook his head apologetically. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett. Your spots have been given to another family. Rules are rules." David stood there, holding Lily, Emily beside him. He wanted to argue, to explain, but words wouldn't come. They walked through the city until Emily spotted the library, the big safe building where she'd gone on school field trips, where story time happened on Saturdays, where nothing bad ever happened. "Daddy, can we go in there?" David looked at the library. It was closing soon, but it was warm, quiet, safe. "Just for tonight," he said, "until I figure something out." They found a spot in the back stacks between tall shelves where the light didn't quite reach. David found a piece of cardboard someone had left behind. "We'll stay here just tonight," he told Emily. "Tomorrow I'll find us somewhere better." But one night became 2, then 3, then a week. Emily learned the library's rhythms, when the staff did their rounds, where the water fountains were, how to move quietly so no one noticed them. She bought crackers with coins she found. She kept Lily entertained with picture books. She made sure they looked like they belonged, just another family spending time in the library. Then Lily got sick. It started with a fever. Then she stopped eating. Her face began to swell, just slightly at first, then more noticeably. Her stomach became distended, bloated. Emily begged her father, "Daddy, Lily's really sick. She needs a doctor." David's eyes were unfocused, distant. "We can't afford a doctor. And if we go to a hospital, they'll ask questions. They'll take you away from me. But she's getting worse." "I can fix it," David said desperately. "I'll fix it. I just need to find the right thing." He used his phone, battery nearly dead, to search frantically. Home remedies for swelling in children, natural cures for fluid retention. What to do when you can't afford medical care. He found websites that seemed authoritative, confident. He used his last few dollars to buy herbs and vinegar from a corner store. He mixed them according to instructions he barely understood, not seeing the tiny disclaimer, not a substitute for professional medical advice. "Lily, baby, drink this," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "It'll help." Lily took a sip and immediately started crying. It burned. "Just a little more," David pleaded. "Please." But Lily refused, turning her face away. Over the next 2 days, Lily got worse. The swelling increased. She stopped responding. Just lay on the cardboard, barely conscious. David sat with his back against the bookshelf, staring at his daughter. "I'm losing her. Just like I lost Rebecca. I don't know what to do. I tried to help, and I failed." And then, on the 3rd morning, something inside David broke completely. His mind simply shut down, a desperate escape from unbearable reality. He stood up slowly, looked at Emily and Lily. "I need to go. I need to find help," he said, his voice flat, disconnected. "You stay here. I'll come back." And then he walked out of the library, not with a plan, not with intention. His body just moved while his mind went somewhere else entirely. Emily woke up an hour later. "Daddy?" She looked around. He wasn't there. "Daddy!" she called, her voice rising with panic. But he was gone, and Emily was alone with her dying sister in a library full of people who would walk past them for 3 more days before anyone stopped. 3 days after David disappeared, Emily sat in a quiet room at Metro General Hospital. The walls were painted a soft blue. There was a box of tissues on the table she hadn't touched. A woman sat across from her, Margaret Hayes, a social worker with kind eyes and 20 years of experience. "Emily," Margaret said gently, "I know you've answered a lot of questions already, but I need to understand what happened so we can help you and Lily. Is that okay?" Emily nodded. She sat perfectly straight in her chair, back not touching the cushion, hands folded precisely in her lap. Margaret noticed immediately. "You know, you can relax here. You can sit however feels comfortable." Emily didn't move. "I'm okay like this." Margaret recognized this. A child who'd learned that being still, being polite, being perfect was the only way to survive. "Can you tell me about when Lily got sick? When did you first notice something was wrong?" Emily's voice was quiet, each word chosen with deliberate care. Her face started getting puffy, and her stomach. It happened slowly, over a few weeks. "Did your dad notice?" "Yes, he got really worried. He said she needed medicine." "But he didn't take her to a doctor?" Emily shook her head. "We didn't have money, and he said if we went to a hospital they'd ask too many questions, that they might take us away from him." "So what did he do?" "He looked things up on his phone. He found something online that was supposed to help with the swelling." Emily paused. "He mixed things together, herbs and vinegar. He said it would make her better." Margaret wrote carefully, keeping her expression neutral. "And what happened when Lily drank it?" "She cried. She said it hurt." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Dad tried to get her to drink more, but she wouldn't. And then she got worse, much worse. She stopped eating. She just laid there." "And then your dad left?" Emily nodded slowly. "He kept saying, 'I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.' He looked so scared, so lost. And then one morning he stood up and said he needed to go find help, that we should wait, that he'd come back." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But he didn't come back." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Emily, when Officer Walsh found you this morning, you said something to him. Do you remember what you said?" Emily looked down at her hands. "I said my dad tried to help and failed." "Why did you choose exactly those words?" Emily was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because I practiced them." Margaret's chest tightened. "You practiced?" "Every time someone walked past us in the library, I thought, maybe this time they'll stop. And I practiced what I would say if they did." Emily looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I practiced being calm. I practiced using words that wouldn't make people scared or angry. I practiced explaining without making it sound bad. Bad how? Like Daddy was a terrible person. Like he hurt us on purpose. Emily wiped her eyes. He wasn't trying to hurt Lily. He was trying to save her. He just didn't know how. And I needed to explain that in a way that would make someone help us without making them take us away forever. Margaret felt her throat tighten. This 10-year-old had been rehearsing how to ask for help like it was a performance, weighing every word, calculating every response. Emily, why didn't you just tell someone your sister was sick and you needed help? Because I was scared, Emily said simply. Scared they'd be angry at Daddy. Scared they'd separate us. Scared I'd say the wrong thing and make everything worse. She looked at Margaret with those two old eyes. So I practiced being perfect, being calm, choosing exactly the right words. There was a knock on the door. Officer Walsh stepped in. Margaret, can I speak with you? Margaret excused herself and stepped into the hallway. We located David Bennett, Thomas said quietly. He was found at a bus station about 70 miles north. He's disoriented, barely coherent. Paramedics are evaluating him now. Is he dangerous? No, he's broken. Thomas looked back through the window at Emily. That little girl is still trying to protect him, even after everything. Margaret nodded. Thomas, when Emily said those words to you, my dad tried to help and failed. She wasn't making an accusation. She was delivering a carefully rehearsed explanation, one she'd practiced over and over, hoping someone would finally stop and listen. Thomas was quiet, absorbing this. She's been training herself for months, Margaret continued, training herself to be calm, to choose perfect words, to not upset anyone. A 10-year-old shouldn't have to rehearse how to ask for help. No, Thomas agreed quietly. She shouldn't. Inside the room, a nurse brought Emily juice and crackers. Emily took them with a quiet, "Thank you," then set them aside carefully, untouched. Even here, even safe, she was still being careful, still being perfect, still choosing every word and action with too much care, because somewhere along the way she'd learned that survival meant never making a mistake. Detective Laura Brennan sat at her desk, reviewing the timeline she'd constructed over the past 2 days. What she'd found was both devastating and infuriating. David Bennett, 38 years old. Wife Rebecca died 11 months ago. Lost his job 8 months ago. Evicted 6 months ago. After that, nothing. The family had vanished from every system. Laura picked up her phone and called Lincoln Elementary School. This is Detective Brennan with Metro PD. I need information on a student named Emily Bennett, age 10. Typing sounds. Yes, I have her record here, but she hasn't attended since 4 months ago. And did anyone follow up on that absence? A report was filed with the district office, standard procedure for extended absences. What happened with the report? More typing. A pause. It looks like it was logged, but there's no record of any follow-up action. No home visit, no phone contact. Laura felt anger rise in her chest. So a 10-year-old disappeared from school 4 months ago, and no one checked? I'm sorry, Detective. It appears to have fallen through the cracks. Laura hung up and turned to Officer Martinez, who'd been conducting interviews all day. What did you find? Martinez opened his notepad. I've interviewed 47 people who regularly visit the library. 32 of them recognized Emily and Lily from the photos. And how many stopped to help? None. 0. Laura stood and walked to the window. 32 people saw them. Not one stopped. Martinez nodded. Most gave similar explanations. They assumed the parents were in another section of the library, that someone else had already checked, that it wasn't their place to interfere. Laura's phone rang. It was Dr. Chen from Metro General. Detective, I've completed Lily Bennett's full medical evaluation. What did you find? Severe chronic malnutrition, untreated bacterial infection that's been progressing for months, acute kidney failure causing the fluid retention. That's why she was so swollen. Laura closed her eyes. And the substance her father gave her? It made things significantly worse. The mixture caused chemical irritation and additional stress to her already failing system. But Detective, Dr. Chen paused. That's not what nearly killed her. What do you mean? Lily has been systematically neglected for months. The malnutrition, the infection, the kidney problems, these developed slowly over time. This child was dying gradually, in full public view, while hundreds of people walked past her every single day. Laura felt the weight of those words settle in her chest. How long has she been this sick? Based on her labs and physical findings, I'd estimate 3 to 4 months of progressive decline. 3 to 4 months, Laura repeated, while they were living in that library. Exactly. Dr. Chen's voice was firm. I'm documenting this clearly in my report. Her body was failing while the world walked past. After hanging up, Laura sat in silence for a moment. Then she picked up her notes and went to find Dorothy, the elderly woman who'd spoken to her at the library. Dorothy lived alone in a small apartment 2 blocks from the library. She invited Laura in, her hands still shaking. Mrs. Patterson, you said you saw the girls multiple times. Can you tell me more about that? Dorothy sat down heavily. I saw them nearly every day for 2 weeks, always in the same spot, between those tall shelves in the back. The older girl was always reading. The little one was always resting. And it never occurred to you to ask if they were okay. Dorothy's voice broke. It did occur to me, every single time. But I kept thinking someone else must be watching them. The library has staff, volunteers. Security must have checked on them. Surely I wasn't the only one who'd noticed. But you were one of 32 people who noticed. And not one of you stopped. Dorothy covered her face with her hands. Why didn't we? That's what I keep asking myself. Why didn't any of us stop? Laura softened her voice. Mrs. Patterson, I'm not here to blame you. I'm trying to understand how this happened. We were all waiting for someone else to do something, Dorothy said quietly. We all saw, we all wondered, but we all assumed that surely, someone more qualified, more responsible, more official had already handled it. And so we all just kept walking. Laura wrote this down, because Dorothy had just articulated the core of what had happened. Not cruelty, not indifference, but a collective assumption that someone else would act, that it wasn't their responsibility, that surely in a place as safe and monitored as a public library, someone official must already be handling it. The question isn't who did this, Laura realized. It's who didn't do anything when they could have. And that answer included dozens of good, normal, caring people who'd simply convinced themselves it wasn't their problem to solve. By the next morning, the story had spread across the entire city and beyond. 2 sisters found living in public library, youngest in critical condition, father missing. Dozens saw them. No one stopped at coffee shops, senior centers, and family dinner tables across town. People gathered to watch the news, read the articles, and grapple with an uncomfortable truth. At the Riverside Senior Center, a group of retirees sat in the common room, the television playing footage of the library, the hospital, and David Bennett being brought in by police. I can't believe this happened at our library, one woman said, shaking her head. That's supposed to be the safest place in town. How could a father do that to his own children? Another added. An older man spoke quietly from his chair. I use that library 3 times a week. I think I might have seen those girls. The room went silent. Did you speak to them? Someone asked gently. He shook his head. No, I thought they were waiting for their mother. I didn't want to intrude on someone else's family. A woman near the window spoke up, her voice trembling. I saw them too. Last Tuesday, the older girl was reading a picture book to the younger one. I remember thinking how sweet it was, how responsible she seemed. She paused, and then I kept walking. One by one, people began sharing their own encounters. I saw them. I wondered if they were okay. I thought about asking. I assumed someone else was responsible. The silence that followed was heavy with collective realization and shame. Online, the comments were even more intense. The father should never see those children again. He was mentally ill and grieving. Where was the support system? Mental illness doesn't excuse child endangerment. But 32 people saw those kids and did nothing. Aren't they responsible too? At Metro General Hospital, Emily sat beside Lily's bed. Lily was awake now, her swelling noticeably reduced, her breathing easier. The IV fluids and antibiotics were working. She looked more like a child again. Emmy, Lily whispered. Yeah, Lil. When are we going home? Emily's chest tightened. She didn't know how to answer that. I don't know yet, sweetie, but we're safe here. Where's Daddy? Emily had been dreading this question for days. He's getting help, the kind of help grown-ups need when they're really, really sad. Is he coming back? I don't know. Lily's eyes filled with tears. I miss Mama. Emily climbed carefully onto the bed and held her sister close. I know, me too. A nurse came in to check Lily's vitals, smiling warmly at both girls. Lily, you're doing so much better today. The doctors are very pleased. After the nurse left, Emily stared out the hospital window at the city below. Somewhere out there were all those people who'd walked past them, who'd seen them day after day and decided not to get involved. Were they watching the news now? Were they recognizing Emily and Lily? Were they asking themselves why they hadn't stopped? Down the hall, Margaret Hayes was on the phone with the district attorney's office. Yes, I understand the charges against David are serious, Margaret said. But I'm asking you to consider the full context. He made catastrophic decisions while experiencing complete psychological collapse. The DA's voice was firm. That doesn't change the fact that his daughter nearly died. I'm not saying it does. I'm saying that if we only prosecute David and don't examine how this family fell through every safety net, we've learned nothing. What are you proposing? Psychiatric evaluation and treatment as part of sentencing, and a community accountability review, because David Bennett isn't the only one who failed these children. There was a pause. The public wants someone to blame, Margaret. Then let's give them the whole truth, Margaret said. Not just one person to punish, but a mirror to look into. After hanging up, Margaret walked back to Lily's room. Emily was still by the window, watching the world below. Emily, Margaret said gently, how are you feeling? Emily didn't turn around. Everyone's talking about my dad like he's a terrible person. I know, people are trying to make sense of something complicated. But he's not terrible. He's just… Emily searched for words. He's just broken, and nobody helped him before he broke completely. Margaret sat down beside her. You're right, and that's what many people are starting to understand. Will it change anything? Margaret was quiet for a moment. I hope so. Emily turned back to the window. All those people in the library. All the people who saw us every single day. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. They're not terrible either. They just thought it wasn't their job to care. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. This 10-year-old understood something most adults struggled to accept, that harm doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from comfortable silence, from the collective agreement that someone else will handle it, from dozens of small decisions not to get involved. Dr. Richard Chen sat in his office at Metro General Hospital, reviewing Lily Bennett's complete medical file for the 5th time. He'd been a pediatrician for 27 years, and he needed to get every detail exactly right. The numbers told a devastating story. Lily was severely malnourished. Her weight was in the 3rd percentile for her age. She had multiple untreated bacterial infections. Her kidney function tests showed significant damage and failure. Blood work revealed chronic vitamin deficiencies, anemia, and electrolyte imbalances. The fluid retention, the swelling that had made her face and abdomen distend so dramatically, was her body's response to kidney failure. Her organs were shutting down, unable to process waste, causing fluids to accumulate in her tissues. And yes, the homemade remedy her father had given her had made things catastrophically worse. The acidic mixture of herbs and vinegar had caused chemical burns to her throat and stomach, adding acute stress to an already failing system. But it hadn't caused the underlying crisis. That had been building for months. Dr. Chen picked up the phone and called Detective Brennan. Detective, this is Dr. Chen. I'm finalizing my report on Lily Bennett. I wanted to discuss my findings with you directly. I'm listening. The substance David Bennett administered was harmful and showed extremely poor judgment. It accelerated her decline, but it's not what nearly killed her. He paused. Lily has been suffering from severe, systematic neglect for months. If someone had brought her to medical attention even 8 weeks ago, all of this could have been prevented. Laura was quiet for a moment. So the home remedy was just the final crisis that forced intervention. But the real damage accumulated slowly, over time, while she lived in full public view. How long has she been this sick, doctor? Based on her lab results, physical examination, and the progression of her symptoms, I'd estimate 3 to 4 months of steady decline. Laura felt the weight of that timeline. 3 to 4 months. While people walked past every single day, Dr. Chen continued, I'm including a specific statement in my official report. I want the court and the community to understand this clearly. What does it say? He read aloud. This child's critical condition was not the result of a single incident. It developed gradually over months of systematic neglect. Her body was failing while the world walked past. The silence on the line was heavy. "That's a powerful statement, Doctor," Laura said finally. "It's the truth, and I think people need to hear it." After hanging up, Dr. Chen walked down to Lily's room. Emily was there, as always, sitting beside her sister's bed. Lily was awake, coloring in a book a volunteer had brought. She looked so much better, the swelling dramatically reduced, color returning to her cheeks, energy slowly coming back. "How are my patients today?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "Good," Emily said quietly. "Lily ate all her breakfast." "That's excellent news." He checked Lily's chart. "Emily, I want you to know something important. Your sister is going to be okay. She's getting stronger every day." "Because of the medicine?" "Yes, but also because you kept her alive when things were very, very hard." He paused. "You gave her water. You kept her safe. You didn't give up on her. That matters." Emily looked down. "But I couldn't make her better." "You weren't supposed to. You're 10 years old. Making her better was the job of doctors and other adults." Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "What happened to Lily wasn't your fault. And it wasn't entirely your father's fault either." Emily looked up, surprised. "Your sister got sick because your family didn't have what they needed. Food, shelter, medical care, support. Those are things children shouldn't have to provide. But somehow, your family slipped through every safety net that's supposed to catch people before they fall this far. So whose fault is it?" Dr. Chen considered the question carefully. "Many people share responsibility. Your father, for not asking for help when he desperately needed it. The community for not offering help when they saw it was needed. The systems meant to protect children for failing to find you before things got this bad." He paused. "We all carry a piece of this." After he left, Emily sat quietly, thinking about what he'd said. She thought about all the people who'd walked past them in the library, all the systems that should have noticed when she stopped going to school, all the moments when someone could have helped. Her father had failed them, but he hadn't been the only one. The world had failed them too, slowly, quietly, by looking the other way, by assuming someone else would act, by choosing comfort over courage. And now, finally, people were beginning to understand that silence has a cost, and sometimes that cost is measured in a child's life. 3 days after Lily was found, David Bennett was located at a bus station 70 miles north of the city. He was sitting on a bench staring at nothing. His clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes hollow and distant. When the officers approached, he didn't resist. He didn't even seem to register their presence. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Officer Walsh. We've been looking for you." David blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream. "Are my daughters okay?" "They're safe. Lily is in the hospital receiving treatment." David's face crumpled. "I tried to help her. I tried so hard." "I know, sir. We need you to come with us now." David stood without protest, moving like someone whose body was operating on autopilot while his mind was somewhere far away. At the police station, Detective Laura Brennan conducted the interview. She'd seen many suspects over her 15 years in homicide and major crimes. She'd learned to recognize the difference between those who were dangerous and those who were simply destroyed. David Bennett was destroyed. He sat across from her in the interview room, hands folded on the table, shoulders slumped. "Mr. Bennett, I need you to tell me what happened. Start from when Lily first got sick." David's voice was barely audible. "She got a fever. Her face started swelling. I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe she'd eaten something bad or it was allergies. Did you consider taking her to a doctor?" "Every single day." His voice cracked. "But we didn't have insurance anymore. I'd lost my job. We didn't have an address. I was terrified that if I took her to a hospital, they'd ask questions. They'd see we were homeless. They'd take my girls away from me." Laura kept her tone neutral. "So, what did you do?" "I used my phone, before the battery died completely, to search for what could help. I found websites that talked about natural remedies for swelling, for fluid retention." He looked up, his eyes desperate. They seemed so confident, so sure. I thought maybe I could fix it myself." "You purchased herbs and vinegar?" "Yes, from a corner store. I followed the instructions I found online exactly. I thought it would help her." "And when Lily drank it?" David's face twisted with anguish. "She screamed, she cried, it hurt her. Tears streamed down his face. I was trying to save her, and I hurt her instead. Laura leaned back slightly. Mr. Bennett, why didn't you ask for help? From anyone. David was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. I didn't know how anymore. After Rebecca died, I couldn't remember how to ask, how to navigate the systems, which forms to fill out, who to call. He wiped his eyes. Rebecca knew all of that. She knew how to get help, but I'd never learned. I'd always depended on her. What about family? Friends? Rebecca's parents are gone. Mine live across the country. We haven't spoken in years. Friends? They drifted away after the funeral. People don't know what to say to someone whose wife just died. So they stopped calling. Laura studied him carefully. Tell me about the day you left the library. David's hands began to shake. Lily was getting worse. So much worse. I could see it. And I knew I was failing. Again. Just like I'd failed Rebecca. His voice dropped to a whisper. I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. My mind was screaming that I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. And then, something just broke inside me. What do you mean, broke? I stood up. I told Emily I needed to go find help, that I'd come back. He looked at Laura with devastated eyes. But I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. My body just moved, and my mind went somewhere else. Somewhere quiet and far away where I didn't have to feel anymore. You walked away from your daughters. Yes. The word came out as a sob. I walked away because I couldn't face what I'd become. Couldn't face that I was letting them down just like I'd let Rebecca down. Laura was quiet for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then, Mr. Bennett, did you intend to harm your daughters? No. God, no. I love them more than anything. But you made choices that put them in severe danger. I know. David covered his face with his hands. I know. And I'll never forgive myself for that. Laura studied him. This broken man who'd made catastrophic decisions not from cruelty, but from complete psychological collapse, from being so overwhelmed by grief and trauma that his mind had simply shut down. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it. Mr. Bennett, when was the last time you asked anyone for help? David thought for a long time. I don't remember. Maybe never. Rebecca always did that for us. And there it was, a man who'd never learned to ask for help, who'd been so paralyzed by shame and fear that he'd chosen to suffer in silence rather than admit he was drowning, who'd convinced himself he could handle everything alone until he couldn't handle anything at all. After the interview, Laura sat in her office reviewing her notes. David Bennett wasn't a monster. He was a man who'd collapsed under unbearable weight, who'd made terrible choices while experiencing complete mental breakdown. But acknowledging that didn't erase the harm he'd caused. It just meant the story was more complicated than anyone wanted it to be. Chapter 11. The Child Who Rehearsed Being Strong. Dr. Sarah Winters had been a child psychologist for 18 years. She'd worked with children who'd survived abuse, neglect, trauma, and loss. She thought she'd seen everything, but Emily Bennett was different. Emily sat in Dr. Winters' office, a warm room with soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and shelves full of books and toys. Most children Emily's age would fidget, explore, ask questions. Emily sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, back straight, eyes watchful. Emily, you can sit however you'd like here, Dr. Winters said gently. You can move around, grab a pillow, sit on the floor if that's more comfortable. I'm okay like this. Dr. Winters made a note. Hypervigilance, excessive self-control. I'd like to talk with you about the past few months. About what things were like before Officer Walsh found you. Is that all right? Emily nodded. Can you tell me about a typical day in the library? Emily's voice was measured, careful. Lily and I would wake up early before most people arrived. I'd take her to the bathroom to wash her face and hands. Then we'd find a quiet spot and I'd read to her from picture books. What about food? I had a little money sometimes. Coins I found. I'd buy crackers or granola bars from the vending machine. And we'd drink water from the fountain. And when people walked past you, what did you think? Emily was quiet for a moment. I thought, maybe this time someone will stop. Maybe this time someone will ask if we're okay. Did you want them to stop? Yes. And no. Emily looked down. I wanted help, but I was scared of what would happen if someone found out how bad things were. What did you think would happen? That they'd be angry at Daddy, that they'd take us away, that we'd be separated. Her voice wavered slightly. So I practiced. Dr. Winters leaned forward. Practiced what, Emily? Practiced what to say if someone stopped. Practiced being calm. Practiced using the right words. Emily looked up, her eyes too old, too aware. I practiced explaining everything in a way that wouldn't make people scared or angry, in a way that would get us help without getting Daddy in trouble. Dr. Winters felt her chest tighten. You rehearsed how to ask for help. Every single day. I'd imagine someone stopping, a librarian, a volunteer, someone nice-looking, and I'd practice in my head what I'd say, how I'd explain about Mama dying, about Daddy trying his best, about Lily being sick but it not being anyone's fault. Emily, do you remember what you said to Officer Walsh when he found you? Emily nodded. My dad tried to help and failed. I'd been practicing that one for a week. Why those specific words? Because they were true but not scary. They explained what happened without making it sound like Daddy was a bad person. Because he's not bad. He's just… She searched for the word. Broken. Dr. Winters had to pause, taking a slow breath to maintain her professional composure. Emily, children shouldn't have to rehearse how to ask for help. That's not your job. But someone had to make sure we got help the right way, Emily said logically. Daddy couldn't do it anymore, so it had to be me. How old were you when you started taking care of Lily? After Mama died, I was 9. Lily was 2. And what did taking care of her look like? Emily spoke matter-of-factly, listing responsibilities like someone describing a job, making sure she ate, changing her when she had accidents, reading to her so she wouldn't cry, keeping her quiet when Daddy needed to rest, making sure she drank enough water, watching to make sure she was safe. That's a lot of responsibility for a 9-year-old. Someone had to do it. Dr. Winters chose her next words carefully. Emily, when Lily got sick and your dad tried to give her that medicine, how did you feel? For the first time, Emily's composure cracked slightly. Scared. Really, really scared. Because I could see she was getting worse and I knew Daddy's medicine wasn't working. But I didn't know what else to do. Did you ask your dad to take her to a hospital? Yes. Every day. But he said we couldn't. That it would cause problems, so I just tried to keep Lily comfortable. I gave her water. I kept her cool with wet paper towels from the bathroom. I told her stories to help her sleep. You did everything you could. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. It wasn't enough. Emily, look at me. Dr. Winters waited until the girl's eyes met hers. What happened to Lily was not your fault. You are 10 years old. Keeping your sister alive was never supposed to be your job. That was the job of adults. And the adults failed you. Tears began streaming down Emily's face. The first tears Dr. Winters had seen from her. But I was there. I was right there with her, and I couldn't make her better. Because you're a child. You shouldn't have to know how to treat kidney failure or infections. You should be protected. You should be cared for. You should be allowed to just be 10 years old. Emily's composure finally shattered completely. She curled forward, sobbing. Not the careful, quiet tears of someone trying to stay in control, but the desperate, exhausted sobs of a child who'd been holding everything together for far too long. Dr. Winters moved to sit beside her, offering quiet comfort. You don't have to be strong anymore, Emily. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to protect everyone. You can just be a child again. Emily cried for a long time. And when she finally stopped, something in her posture had changed. She was still sitting up, still composed, but her shoulders had dropped just slightly. Her hands had unclenched. For the first time in months, she'd allowed herself to stop rehearsing, to stop performing strength, to just be a scared, exhausted 10-year-old who'd survived something no child should ever have to face. Chapter 12. The hearing that changed everything 3 months later. The Millbrook Community Center auditorium was packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, cameras set up in the back. This wasn't a trial. It was something different, a community accountability hearing, a chance for everyone involved to speak, to listen, to understand what had happened and why. Judge Patricia Lawson sat at the front table. She was in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of human struggle. Beside her sat Detective Brennan, Dr. Chen, Margaret Hayes, and several community leaders. Emily and Lily sat in the front row with their temporary foster family. Lily looked healthy now, color in her cheeks, Energy restored, the swelling completely gone. She held a stuffed rabbit and swung her legs, unaware of the weight of this moment. Emily sat very still, watching everything. David Bennett sat on the other side of the room, flanked by his court-appointed attorney. He'd been in psychiatric treatment for the past 3 months. He looked different, cleaner, more present, but carrying the heavy burden of what he'd done. Judge Lawson called the hearing to order. "This is not a criminal proceeding," she began. "Mr. Bennett will face those charges separately. Today, we're here to understand how a family fell through every safety net in our community, how 2 children lived in a public library for weeks while hundreds of people walked past them, and what we can do to ensure this never happens again." She gestured to Dr. Chen. "Doctor, would you please present your medical findings?" Dr. Chen stood and approached the microphone. He spoke clearly, without medical jargon, making sure everyone understood. Lily Bennett was suffering from severe malnutrition, multiple untreated infections, and acute kidney failure when she was brought to Metro General. Her condition was critical. Another few days without intervention, and she would have died. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "But here's what's important to understand," Dr. Chen continued. "Lily didn't get sick overnight. Her condition developed over months during which she was visible to hundreds of people every single day." He paused, letting that sink in. "The substance her father administered made things worse, yes, but it didn't cause the underlying crisis. That was caused by systematic neglect over an extended period, neglect that occurred in plain sight." He returned to his seat. Judge Lawson nodded to Detective Brennan. "Detective?" Laura stood. "Our investigation identified 32 individuals who saw Emily and Lily in the library on multiple occasions: staff members, volunteers, regular patrons." She looked out at the crowd. "Many of you are here today." The room went very quiet. "I interviewed each of these individuals. Not one stopped to ask if the children were okay. Not one reported concerns to library staff. Not one called Child Protective Services." Laura's voice remained steady, but her words landed with weight. "When I asked why, the answers were remarkably consistent. I assumed someone else was watching them. I didn't want to intrude. I thought library staff had already checked. Surely someone more qualified had handled it." She paused. "Everyone assumed someone else would act, and so no one did." Judge Lawson looked out at the assembled crowd. "I'd like to ask a question. How many people in this room saw Emily and Lily Bennett at the library at any point over the past 6 months?" Slowly, hesitantly, hands began to rise. 5, 10, 20, 30. Nearly half the room had their hands up. "And how many of you stopped to ask if they were okay? To offer help? To report concerns?" Every hand lowered. Not one remained raised. The silence was crushing. Judge Lawson let it sit for a long moment. Then she spoke quietly. "We are a community that prides itself on caring for our neighbors, on watching out for each other, on being a safe place for families." She looked around the room. "But somehow, we all walked past 2 children in crisis and convinced ourselves it wasn't our responsibility." An elderly woman in the 3rd row stood up, her voice shaking. "Your Honor, I'm Dorothy Patterson. I saw those girls at least 10 times, and I did nothing. I've been asking myself every single day since, why didn't I stop? Why didn't I ask?" She looked at Emily, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I failed you. We all failed you." Others began standing. "I'm Robert Chen. I'm a library volunteer. I saw them and walked away." "I'm Sarah Martinez. I brought my own children to that library every week. I saw those girls and assumed their mother was nearby." "I'm James Patterson. I noticed the younger child looked unwell, and I said nothing." One by one, people stood and confessed, not to malice, not to cruelty, but to silence, to assumption, to choosing comfort over courage. Judge Lawson watched this unfold, then turned to Emily. "Emily, would you like to say anything?" Emily looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. Then she stood. At 10 years old, she looked impossibly small standing before this crowd of adults. But when she spoke, her voice was clear. "Everyone wants to know what happened to my sister. They want to know who's responsible, who to blame." She paused, looking out at all the faces. But maybe that's the wrong question. The room was absolutely silent. Emily took a breath. "Maybe the question isn't who did this to us. Maybe the question is, who didn't do anything when they could have?" Her words hung in the air like smoke. All of you saw us. Some of you even smiled at us. But none of you stopped. None of you asked if we were okay. None of you wanted to get involved. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes were steady. And because of that, my sister almost died. Judge Lawson felt tears in her eyes. This child was delivering the most devastating indictment she'd ever heard. Not an accusation of malice, but a simple statement of truth. I don't think any of you are bad people, Emily continued. I think you're just people who thought someone else would help, that it wasn't your job, that surely someone official, someone more qualified, someone more responsible had already taken care of it. She looked at David across the room. My dad made terrible mistakes, but he was one person, broken and alone. All of you together could have helped us, and you chose not to. Emily sat down. The silence that followed was absolute, because there was no defense, no excuse, no villain to point to, just a community forced to look at itself in the mirror, and realizing they didn't like what they saw. Chapter 13, The Question That Silences. The silence in the auditorium stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Judge Lawson finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Emily, thank you for your courage in speaking today. What you've said is difficult to hear, but it's truth we all need to face. She turned to address the room. For weeks I've been reviewing the facts of this case, the timeline, the missed opportunities, the systems that failed. She paused. And what I've found is that there is no single villain in this story. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. David Bennett made catastrophic decisions while experiencing complete psychological collapse. He will face consequences for those choices, but his breakdown didn't happen in a vacuum. He lost his wife, lost his job, lost his home, and not one system caught him before he fell completely apart. Judge Lawson looked at the library staff. The school system filed a report when Emily stopped attending 4 months ago. That report was logged and forgotten. No follow-up, no home visit, no phone call. Linda Chen, the head librarian, stood. Your Honor, may I speak? Please. Linda's voice trembled. I've been the head librarian at Millbrook for 15 years. I love that library. I love our community, and I am devastated by what happened. She looked at Emily. I saw you and your sister multiple times, and I convinced myself that everything was fine, that your mother was somewhere in the building, that you were safe. She turned to face the crowd. But I never checked. I never asked, because asking would have meant getting involved. It would have meant potentially discovering something uncomfortable, something that would require me to act, to make calls, to take responsibility. Her voice broke. And so I chose comfort over courage. I chose assumption over action. And I will carry that for the rest of my life. An older man stood in the back. Mr. Chen, a regular patron. I'm retired military, 30 years of service. I was trained to notice when something's wrong, to act, to protect. His voice was thick with emotion, and I walked past those children every single day. I saw them. I noticed the little one getting sicker, and I did nothing. Why? Judge Lawson asked gently. Because it was easier to assume someone else had already handled it than to risk being wrong, risk being intrusive, risk the discomfort of getting involved in someone else's family business. A younger woman stood. I'm a teacher. I've been trained in recognizing signs of neglect. I saw those girls in the library when I was there with my class for a field trip. The older one had that look. Too watchful, too responsible, too adult. I recognized it, and I still walked away. Why? Judge Lawson asked again. Because I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was seeing problems where there weren't any, that surely in a public place like a library, with staff and volunteers and security cameras, someone official must already be monitoring the situation. One by one, people stood and confessed their assumptions, their rationalizations, their comfortable silence. Dorothy Patterson stood leaning on her cane. I'm 83 years old. I've lived through wars, recessions, loss. I've seen enough suffering to know what it looks like. Her voice wavered, and I saw it in those children. But I'm old. I'm not strong. I told myself I wasn't capable of helping, that someone younger, someone more capable should handle it. She looked directly at Emily. But the truth is, I could have made a phone call. I could have spoken to library staff. I could have done something, and I chose not to because it was easier not to. Margaret Hayes, the social worker, stood. Your Honor, I've worked in child protective services for 20 years, and what we're seeing here is something I encounter constantly, what we call the bystander effect. The more people who witness something, the less likely any single person is to act because everyone assumes someone else will. She gestured to the crowd. 32 people saw Emily and Lily, and precisely because so many people saw them, each individual person felt less personal responsibility to act. Everyone thought, with this many people around, surely someone else has already done something. Judge Lawson nodded slowly. And so everyone's responsibility became no one's responsibility. Exactly. Emily stood again. All eyes turned to her. May I say one more thing? Her voice was small but steady. Of course, Judge Lawson said. Emily looked out at all the faces. The guilty, the grieving, the ashamed. I practiced for weeks what I would say if someone stopped. I practiced being calm, using the right words, not scaring anyone, making it easy for someone to help us. Her voice grew stronger. But what I've learned is that it shouldn't have been my job to make it easy. It shouldn't have been my responsibility to find exactly the perfect words that would make an adult decide to care. The room was absolutely still. The question everyone keeps asking is, who did this to us? Who's responsible for what happened? Emily paused, her eyes moving across the crowd. But maybe the real question, the one that actually matters, is different. She took a breath. Maybe the question isn't who did this to us. Maybe the question is who saw us suffering and chose to do nothing. The silence that followed was profound, because Emily had just articulated what everyone had been avoiding, that this wasn't a story about one person's failure. It was a story about collective responsibility, about a community that had chosen comfortable silence over uncomfortable action, about dozens of good people who had made small, individual decisions not to get involved, decisions that added up to a child nearly dying. Judge Lawson stood. Emily, you've given us the most important question. Not who is the villain, but why did we all choose silence? She looked out at the crowd. We are going to have to sit with that question, all of us, because until we can answer it honestly, we haven't learned anything, and this will happen again. The hearing continued for another hour. Discussions about new protocols, training for library staff, community awareness programs, mandatory reporting refreshers. But everyone in that room knew the truth. All the protocols in the world wouldn't matter if people continued to choose comfort over courage, if they continued to assume someone else would act, if they continued to believe that looking the other way was somehow neutral. Emily had given them the mirror, and what they saw reflected back was deeply uncomfortable, but perhaps discomfort was exactly what was needed. Chapter 14. No miracles, but truth. 3 months after the hearing. The Millbrook Public Library looked the same from the outside. Same tall windows, same stone steps, same wooden doors that had seen decades of families pass through. But inside, everything had changed. A large poster near the entrance read, "If you see something, say something. Children alone, family in distress, don't assume someone else will help. You can make the difference." Linda Chen stood at the circulation desk, training a new volunteer, a retired teacher named Mrs. Abrams. "This is our new protocol," Linda explained, showing her a simple checklist. "If you see children unaccompanied for more than 30 minutes, you check in with them. You don't assume someone else will. You don't wait. You ask, are you waiting for someone? Do you need help? Can I call anyone for you?" Mrs. Abrams nodded seriously. "And if they seem distressed or the situation seems wrong, you come get me or any staff member immediately. We document it. We make calls if necessary. We don't walk away." Linda's voice was firm. "We don't ever walk away again." Across town, at Metro General Hospital, Lily Bennett sat in Dr. Chen's office for her 3-month follow-up. She was healthy now, completely recovered. Her kidney function had returned to normal. The infections were gone. She was a vibrant, active 3-year-old again. "Lily, can you hop on one foot for me?" Dr. Chen asked. Lily giggled and hopped enthusiastically. "Excellent. And how's she eating?" he asked Emily, who sat nearby. "Really well. She ate all her breakfast this morning and lunch yesterday." Dr. Chen smiled. "That's wonderful. Lily, you're doing great. I'm very proud of how strong you've become." After Lily ran off to play with toys in the corner, Dr. Chen spoke quietly to Emily. "And how are you doing?" Emily considered the question carefully, a habit she was slowly learning to break. "Better. I'm seeing Dr. Winters twice a week. She's helping me not rehearse everything so much. That's good. You're allowed to just answer honestly, you know. You don't have to have the perfect response. I know. Emily smiled slightly. I'm working on it. At the county courthouse, David Bennett sat across from his attorney in a small conference room. He'd completed 3 months of intensive psychiatric treatment. He'd been diagnosed with severe depression, complicated grief, and acute stress disorder. He was facing charges: child endangerment, neglect. The district attorney had agreed to a plea deal: psychiatric treatment, supervised visitation with his daughters, community service, probation. No jail time. Because everyone, prosecutors, social workers, the judge, had agreed that punishing a broken man wouldn't fix the systems that had failed his family. David, are you clear on the terms? His attorney asked. David nodded. I continue treatment. Weekly therapy. I don't have unsupervised contact with Emily and Lily until Dr. Winters and the court agree. I'm stable. I complete 200 hours of community service speaking about mental health and asking for help. And you understand this is a gift? That you could have faced much more serious consequences? I understand. David's voice was quiet. And I understand that I need to do the work, not just for the court, but for my daughters, so I can be the father they deserve. Do you think you can be that person? David was quiet for a long moment. I don't know yet, but I'm going to try. And this time, I'm going to ask for help when I need it. At Lincoln Elementary School, Emily walked through the front doors for the first time in 6 months. She wore new clothes, donated by a local church. She carried a backpack with fresh supplies, provided by a community fundraiser. She was nervous, scared, but not alone. Margaret Hayes walked beside her. Remember, if you need anything, if you feel overwhelmed, if you need to talk, you can go to the counselor's office anytime. Okay. And Emily? Margaret waited until the girl looked at her. You don't have to be perfect here. You can just be a 5th grader. You can make mistakes. You can ask for help. You can just be a kid. Emily nodded, though the concept still felt foreign. In her classroom, Mrs. Franklin, her teacher, greeted her warmly. Emily, welcome back. We've missed you. Emily took her seat. Other students glanced at her curiously. Some had seen the news, others whispered. But at lunch, a girl named Sophia sat down beside her. Hi, I'm Sophia. Want to sit with us? Emily hesitated, then nodded. Okay. It was a small moment, an ordinary kindness. But for Emily, it was everything. At the community center, Dorothy Patterson stood before a group of seniors attending a workshop titled, How to Help Recognizing When Someone Needs You. My name is Dorothy, she began, her voice shaking slightly. And 3 months ago, I walked past 2 children who desperately needed help. I saw them. I knew something was wrong, and I did nothing. She told her story, all of it. The shame, the guilt, the rationalizations. I'm here today because I never want to make that mistake again, and I don't want any of you to make it either. She looked around the room. We're not too old to help. We're not too uninvolved to care. When we see someone struggling, we don't get to assume someone else will handle it. An older man raised his hand. But what if we're wrong? What if we interfere and everything's actually fine? Dorothy smiled sadly. Then we apologize for the intrusion. We accept being wrong. But that's better than being right that something's wrong and doing nothing. All across Millbrook, small changes were happening. Library staff checking on unaccompanied children. Teachers being retrained on reporting procedures. Community members learning to ask uncomfortable questions. Neighbors talking to each other instead of assuming. None of it was miraculous. None of it was easy. But it was real. And it was necessary. Because what happened to Emily and Lily had shown everyone a truth they couldn't unsee. Silence has a cost. Comfort has a price. And sometimes the price is measured in a child's life. 6 months after the hearing. It was a Saturday morning at Millbrook Public Library. The same library where everything had changed. Emily sat at a table in the children's section working on homework. Beside her, Lily colored in a book, humming softly to herself. But this time they weren't hiding. They weren't alone. They weren't afraid. They were just 2 sisters spending time at the library like any other family. Their foster family, the Harrisons, sat nearby. Mrs. Harrison read a novel while Mr. Harrison helped their own son with a school project. They'd taken Emily and Lily in 4 months ago, and slowly, carefully, the girls were learning what safety felt like. Emily looked up from her math worksheet and watched Lily. Really watched her. Lily was healthy, happy. Her red hair had been trimmed neatly. She wore clothes that fit. She laughed freely, without fear. For the first time in a year, Emily wasn't in constant alert mode. She wasn't scanning for danger. She wasn't calculating what needed to happen next to keep them safe. She was just present. A shadow fell across the table. Emily looked up to see Dorothy Patterson standing there, leaning on her cane, holding a picture book. "Hello, Emily," Dorothy said gently. "I don't know if you remember me." "I remember you," Emily said quietly. "You came to the hearing. You apologized." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, and I meant every word." She held out the book. "I saw this in the new arrivals section. It made me think of Lily. Would it be all right if I gave it to her?" Emily looked at the book, a story about a brave little rabbit. Then she looked at Dorothy's face, at the genuine care there, the regret, the hope for a small chance at redemption. "Lily would love it," Emily said. "Thank you." Dorothy handed the book to Lily, who squealed with delight. Then Dorothy looked at Emily again. "How are you both doing?" "We're okay, getting better." "I'm glad." "So very glad." Dorothy paused. "Emily, I want you to know, I will never walk past a child in need again. Ever. You taught me that." After Dorothy left, Mrs. Harrison came over and sat beside Emily. "That was kind of you, accepting her gift." Emily shrugged. "She's trying to do better, that matters." Across the library, Linda Chen was training another new volunteer, pointing out the protocols, explaining the importance of paying attention. "We're not just librarians," Linda was saying. "We're community guardians. We notice, we care, we act." Near the front entrance, Officer Thomas Walsh stopped by on his regular rounds. He still thought about that morning 6 months ago, the morning he'd finally stopped and looked instead of walking past. He nodded to Linda. "Everything good today?" "Everything's good," Linda said. "We had a mom come in this morning who looked exhausted, like she was barely holding it together. I asked if she needed help. Turns out her car broke down and she had no way to get to her job interview. We made some calls, connected her with a community service. She got to her interview." Thomas smiled. "That's exactly right. We learned," Linda said simply. "Finally we learned." Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the library steps. A young mother arrived with her toddler. An elderly man carried books to return. A teenager sat on a bench, reading. Ordinary moments. Ordinary people. But now they looked at each other differently. They noticed when someone seemed overwhelmed. They asked if people needed help. They didn't assume someone else would care. Inside, Lily tugged on Emily's sleeve. "Emmy, can we get more books?" "Sure, Lil." They walked hand in hand to the picture book section. As they browsed, Emily heard a small voice behind her. "Excuse me?" Emily turned. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, stood alone near the shelves. He looked worried. "I can't find my mom," he said, his voice trembling. 6 months ago, Emily would have frozen, would have been terrified to get involved, would have assumed an adult should handle this. But now she knelt down to his eye level. "It's okay. We'll help you find her. What's your name?" "Connor." "Hi, Connor, I'm Emily. Let's go tell the librarian, okay? She'll help us find your mom really fast." Emily took Connor's hand and walked him to the circulation desk. Linda immediately got on the PA system, and within minutes, a frantic mother rushed over, scooping Connor into her arms. "Thank you," the mother said to Emily, tears in her eyes. "Thank you so much." Emily smiled. "I'm glad he's okay." As Emily returned to Lily, Mrs. Harrison watched with pride. This girl who'd been forced to be an adult too soon was learning how to be a child again, but keeping the compassion she'd learned through suffering. That evening, at Dr. Winter's office, Emily talked about her week. "I helped a lost kid today at the library," Emily said. "How did that feel?" Emily thought about it. "Good, but different than before." "Different how?" "Before, I helped people because I had to, because no one else would, because everything depended on me." Emily paused. "But today I helped because I wanted to, and because other adults were there too. I wasn't alone." Dr. Winters smiled. "That's beautiful, Emily. You're learning that caring for others doesn't have to mean carrying everything yourself." "Yeah." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Winters, do you think people really changed? Or will they forget what happened and go back to not noticing?" "I think some people will forget," Dr. Winters said honestly. But I think many won't. I think what happened will stay with them. Will change how they see the world. I hope so. Me too. That night, Emily and Lily sat with the Harrisons in their living room. Lily was already in pajamas, falling asleep against Mrs. Harrison's shoulder. Emily sat on the couch, finally allowing herself to relax. Mr. Harrison looked at Emily. We got some news today. Your dad has made significant progress in treatment. The court has approved supervised visits starting next month. Emily's expression was complicated. Hope, fear, uncertainty. How do you feel about that? Mrs. Harrison asked gently. I don't know yet, Emily admitted. I'm still figuring it out. That's okay, you don't have to know. You're allowed to have complicated feelings. Emily nodded, grateful she didn't have to have all the answers anymore. Outside, the city continued its rhythms. People came and went. Families struggled and survived. Children needed help. Adults had to choose whether to see or look away. And in Millbrook, more people were choosing to see, to notice, to care, to act. Because they'd learned something precious and painful, that in any community, at any age, looking is still an act of love, not the dramatic kind of love that makes headlines, but the quiet, daily kind of love that notices when someone is struggling, that asks uncomfortable questions, that risks being wrong in order to help someone who might be right, the kind of love that doesn't assume someone else will care, the kind of love that says, I see you, you matter, I will not walk past. Emily looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, healthy, safe, loved. And for the first time in a year, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Not because of one person's heroism, but because a community had learned to see. And seeing, really seeing, was everything. The end. Sometimes it's not cruelty that destroys a family. It's the polite, comfortable, collective silence when everyone sees and everyone assumes someone else will do something. In any community, at any age, looking is still an act of love. This story is dedicated to every person who has ever stopped to ask if someone needed help, and to every person learning that it's never too late to start.